This isn't a car. It's a coffin for lies.
If you had met me a few years ago, you wouldn't recognize the man I am today. Back then, I was Mark Thompson, 42 years old, hollowed out by life, living in a rented climate-controlled storage unit on the edge of town. My world had shrunk to a 10 by 12 space with a cot, a duffel bag, and a stack of canned soup. I ate it cold, straight from the can, because even the flicker of a camp stove felt too risky. The hum of the fluorescent light above me was the only sound most nights, a steady reminder of how far I'd fallen. I told myself it was temporary, a week, maybe two, but in truth, I didn't know if I'd ever climb back out. Now, years later, I wake up in a house filled with warmth and laughter, the scent of coffee drifting in from the kitchen. I'm the owner of a company that's thriving beyond anything I once thought possible. My name is printed on contracts, etched into glass doors, and my kids live with me, happy, grounded, safe. People see me now and assume I've always been this man, confident, secure, successful. They don't see the nights I spent in silence, clutching old photographs, wondering if my life had already ended. The path between that locker and this life feels unreal, almost mythic, but I share it because somewhere out there, someone is still in their version of that storage unit, convinced they've reached the end. I want them to know that sometimes rock bottom isn't an ending. It's a door. I grew up in Riverside, Pennsylvania, a modest town that sat like a tired pocket of the world about an hour northeast of Philadelphia. There were maybe 11,000 people there, give or take, and just one real employer, Patterson Timber Company. That mill was the heart of Riverside, its noise, its smell, its rhythm. If you didn't work there, you were related to someone who did. My father was one of those men, steady and broad-shouldered, the kind of man who fixed things without needing to say much. He died when I was 6. They said it was an industrial accident. A malfunctioning loader crushed him instantly. The investigation was quick, tidy, and done within a week. My Uncle Ray, my dad's younger brother, and a decorated veteran who'd served 2 tours in Iraq, never believed it was an accident. Every Thanksgiving, he'd have a few beers and start talking about company men and cover-ups, saying someone wanted my dad out of the way. My mother would hush him before he got too far, and the grown-ups would change the subject. Everyone said Uncle Ray was damaged from the war, but he always looked at me with a kind of warning in his eyes, like he knew something I didn't. After my mother passed when I was 20, Ray unraveled completely. He sold everything, moved to Wyoming, built a cabin in the mountains, and started living like a hermit. He'd show up once a year around Thanksgiving, grizzled and thin, his eyes sharper than ever. He'd talk about betrayal, hidden truths, and wolves dressed like neighbors. I used to smile and humor him, but over time I started to think maybe he wasn't as crazy as everyone believed. I met Jessica Driscoll in high school. She was one of those girls who seemed born for better places. Blonde hair, flawless skin, that easy kind of charm that made the world bend toward her. She was a cheerleader. I was just the quiet kid from a working-class family, running trucks at the mill on weekends and driving a truck that coughed more than it ran. But somehow, she noticed me. We fell for each other hard and fast, the way only teenagers can, like there was nothing else in the world but us. We got married right after graduation in the community center with paper streamers and folding chairs. Her parents thought she was making a mistake, that she was throwing her future away. But Jessica told me she wanted something real, a life built on love, not money. We were kids playing at being adults, but in those early days it felt like we had everything we needed. I still remember our wedding night, Uncle Ray raising his glass during his toast. He said, "Be careful, Mark. Wolves wear smiles sometimes." The crowd laughed uneasily, chalking it up to his war scars. But years later, those words would echo in my mind like a curse. We bought a small house on Birch Street. 3 bedrooms, 1 bathroom, a kitchen straight out of the early 80s. The wallpaper peeled, the floors squeaked, and the furnace sounded like an old man clearing his throat. But it was ours. We spent months repainting every wall, scrubbing, fixing, rebuilding. Jessica chose yellow for the kitchen because she said it would make mornings brighter, and she was right. Every morning the sunlight spilled in through the window and caught in her hair as she packed lunches. I used to drink my coffee and think I'd somehow won the lottery of life. 2 years later, our son Ethan was born during a brutal snowstorm that shut down the whole town. 3 years after that, our daughter Lily arrived, calm and smiling from her first breath. Holding them both, I remember thinking that life had finally given me more than I deserved. I worked at Patterson Timber for 16 years, I started out loading trucks at 24 and climbed my way up to operations manager by 35. It wasn't glamorous, but it was honest work. The sawdust clung to everything. My clothes, my hair, the car seats. But I wore that smell like a badge of pride. Jessica used to bury her face in my shirt when I got home and say I smelled like real life. But things changed when old man Patterson retired. His son Derek took over, and everything good about that company started to rot. Derek was in his late 30s, the kind of man who'd never done a day of hard work in his life. He wore expensive cologne and silk shirts, showing up twice a week to collect praise for profits he hadn't earned. He was charming when he wanted to be, cruel when he didn't, and his eyes lingered too long on women who worked there. I noticed it, but didn't think much of it. That's how blind I was. The signs were there long before everything fell apart. Jessica started dressing differently. New clothes, new perfume, hair appointments that seemed to last all day. She'd talk about how our house was too small, how our vacations were nice but simple, how I could be doing more. She'd drop Derek's name casually. Derek says there's room for growth if you just push harder. And I thought she was trying to help me move up. Now I know she was just laying the groundwork for betrayal. The day everything collapsed was a Thursday in April. I woke up nauseous, dizzy, sweating. Pete, my foreman, took one look at me and said I should go home before I passed out. I rarely took sick days, but I listened. I drove home slowly, the road swimming in front of me. When I turned onto Birch Street, I saw Derek's silver BMW in my driveway. It gleamed like a taunt, parked next to Jessica's Honda. My first thought was that something must have happened at work. Maybe Derek was there to deliver bad news in person. That's how naive I was. The front door was locked, which was strange. We never locked it during the day, not in Riverside. I unlocked it, stepped inside, and froze. Then I heard it. Jessica's laugh. Not the polite laugh she used at parties. Not the casual one she used with the kids. It was soft and private. The laugh I used to think was mine. I climbed the stairs slowly, past our wedding photo, past Ethan's kindergarten picture, past Lily's finger paintings taped to the wall. The bedroom door was half open. Derek was sitting on my side of the bed, buttoning his shirt. Jessica was wearing a silk robe I'd never seen before. They were talking about Paris, about a restaurant with a view of the Eiffel Tower, as if my entire world wasn't collapsing around them. I stood in the doorway and said hello. Derek froze, his face going the color of chalk. He muttered something about talking at work tomorrow and brushed past me like I was a stranger in my own house. Jessica didn't even flinch. She turned to the vanity, the one I'd built her for our 10th anniversary, and began brushing her hair, slow and steady. I asked her how long it had been going on. She didn't even look up. "Does it matter?" she said. When I reminded her that our children slept in that house, she finally turned. Her expression was cold, detached. "Do you really think Ethan wants to end up like you?" she said. "Working yourself into the ground for nothing? Lily's already smarter than both of us. They deserve more." Then she told me Derek was taking her to Europe, that he'd bought her a condo in the city, that she was tired of pretending this life was enough. She looked at me with pity, the kind that cuts deeper than anger, and said I'd peaked, that I'd lived my whole life thinking small. I don't remember what I said after that. I remember the sound of the brush dropping to the floor. I remember the silence between us, thick and final. I remember walking out into the evening, the air cold against my skin, and realizing that everything I thought was solid had turned to dust. What I didn't realize then was that I'd just taken my first step toward becoming someone new. Because sometimes the worst day of your life doesn't end you. It cracks you open, makes room for something stronger to grow. The next morning, I showed up to work like nothing happened. Derek's assistant called me to the office around 9. Derek was behind his father's old desk, not even looking up from his computer. He said they were making budget cuts and my position was being eliminated immediately. I mentioned I'd been there 16 years. He said I'd been adequately compensated and security would escort me out. I could sign the separation agreement and get 2 weeks severance or refuse and get nothing. I asked if this was about Jessica. He smiled then, that smile I wanted to punch off his face, and said it was about efficiency, nothing personal. I signed because no job meant no lawyer for the divorce I knew was coming. Security walked me out past men I'd worked with for nearly 2 decades. Pete and the others watched. They knew this wasn't about budget cuts. In a town like Riverside, everyone would know by dinner time. The divorce papers were served the next week. Jessica had hired the most expensive lawyer in 3 counties, somehow affording a retainer that should have been impossible on our income. She wanted the house, full custody, alimony, and child support from a man who just lost his only income. The judge was a guy named Harrison, who'd received campaign contributions from Derek Patterson. He decided I was an unstable influence on my children because I'd punched the garage wall once when I got served papers. Never mind 16 years of steady employment and coaching Ethan's youth football team. Judge Harrison gave Jessica everything. That's how I ended up in the storage unit. After losing the court battle, I started by sleeping in my truck until cops told me to move along. Crashed on friends' couches until their wives got uncomfortable. Finally rented a 10 by 15 climate-controlled unit at U-Store on Route 30 for $90 a month. The night security guard, an older guy named Frank, pretended not to notice when I started staying past closing. I arranged my stuff like furniture. Camping cot against one wall, Dad's old toolbox as a table, battery-powered lantern for light. Kept my clothes in plastic bins, showered at the gym down the road for $10 a month. You learn to heat soup on a camping stove, wash dishes in a bucket, live so quietly that nobody knows you're there. I was in my third week in that concrete box when I decided to sort through the boxes Jessica had dumped there during the divorce. Mostly stuff she didn't want but knew I valued. Photo albums, Dad's military medals from Korea, Christmas decorations we'd collected over the years. Each box was like getting punched in the gut with memories from a life that felt like someone else's dream. That's when I found it. A leather briefcase wedged behind a box of ornaments covered in dust like it had been there forever. Brown leather with a combination lock and a luggage tag that made my heart stop. My name written on it in Uncle Ray's shaky handwriting. But Ray had been dead for 8 months. How did this briefcase get into my storage unit? I tried every combination I could think of. Birthdays, anniversaries, nothing worked. Finally, I took a screwdriver and pried the lock until the metal gave way. The case popped open with a sound that echoed off the concrete walls. Inside was cash. Neat stacks of $100 bills wrapped in bank bands. I counted it 3 times because my hands were shaking so badly I kept losing count. $50,000. More money than I'd ever seen outside a movie, but it was the letter underneath that changed absolutely everything. Written in Ray's messy handwriting on yellow legal paper. It started, "Mark, if you're reading this, you've lost everything. Good. A man can't rebuild until the foundation is clear. This money isn't charity. It's travel funds for what you need to do next. Drive to these coordinates in Wyoming, park at the rusted gate on Wolf Ridge Road, walk east 2 miles until you find the boulder shaped like a face. Behind it is the truth about why your father died." The letter went on. Ray said he knew everyone thought he was crazy, but crazy is just what people call you when you see things others don't want to see. He explained that my father didn't die in an accident at the mill. He was eliminated by Patterson Sr. because Dad wouldn't sell his share of mineral rights. Those rights were worth millions now and belonged to me. Ray had spent 40 years gathering proof, building wealth from his own share of the rights, waiting for the right moment. But cancer had got him and he wouldn't live to see justice. That was my job now. The cabin in Wyoming had everything I needed. Documents, recordings, photographs, even surprises about Jessica. He warned me not to trust anyone, especially family, because my cousin Dennis was in Patterson's pocket and had been for years. The letter ended by saying my father would be proud of the man I'd become, even if that man was sleeping in a storage unit. Sometimes the lowest point is where you need to be to see the stars. Make them pay for what they took from us. The coordinates pointed to somewhere near Yellowstone, Wyoming wilderness, where Ray had lived like a hermit since leaving Pennsylvania decades ago. I sat on that camping cot holding $50,000 while my stomach growled from hunger. This money could get me an apartment, hire a lawyer, maybe fight for shared custody of my kids. It could solve every immediate problem I had. But Ray's words about my father's homicide kept echoing in my head. What truth was waiting in Wyoming? What surprises about Jessica? The decision wasn't really a decision at all. The next morning, I bought a used Ford pickup for $7,000 cash from a dealer who didn't ask questions. Loaded it with camping gear, supplies, enough food for a week on the road. I told nobody where I was going because there was nobody to tell. My kids weren't allowed contact with me. My friends had chosen sides in the divorce, and I wasn't on the winning team. Before leaving Pennsylvania, I drove past the house on Birch Street one last time. Ethan's bike was in the driveway. Lily's bedroom window had new purple curtains instead of the pink ones she'd picked out with me. Jessica's car was gone, probably at Derek's downtown condo. The life I'd built was continuing without me like I'd never existed at all. The drive to Wyoming took 4 days of hard driving, stopping only for gas and a few hours of sleep at rest stops. The coordinates led me deep into wilderness country, where roads went from paved to gravel to barely more than tracks. Wolf Ridge Road was marked by a rusty, bullet-riddled sign, the kind of place where GPS gives up and tells you you're on your own. The gate Ray mentioned was actually more rust than red, with a heavy chain and lock. It opened with the key Ray had given me last Thanksgiving, a year before he died. Beyond it, the road disappeared completely. I parked and started hiking east using my phone's compass until even that lost signal. The forest was so thick, sunlight barely reached the ground. Every sound made me jump. I was in barren wolf country, completely alone. The boulder shaped like a face sat in a clearing exactly 2 miles from the gate, according to my step counting. It was massive, maybe 15 feet tall, and from the right angle, really did look like a profile. Behind it, hidden by overgrown brush, was a trail leading another 100 yards to a cabin that shouldn't exist. This wasn't some ramshackle hermit's shack. This was a modern structure with solar panels on the roof, a satellite dish, even a generator humming quietly behind a shed. The door was reinforced steel, opening with another key from Ray's ring. Inside looked like a combination of living space and detective's evidence room. One entire wall was covered with photographs, documents, newspaper clippings going back 40 years. Another wall had filing cabinets, each drawer meticulously labeled by year and subject. A desk supported 3 large computer monitors and surveillance equipment that must have cost tens of thousands of dollars. The first thing that caught my eye was my father's photograph. Young and smiling, maybe 30 years old, standing next to old man Patterson at the timber mill. They were holding papers, shaking hands, both looking happy. The caption Ray had written underneath said, "Partnership Agreement, 1978. My dad hadn't been just an employee. He'd been Patterson's equal partner. The documents told the full story piece by piece. My father, Daniel Thompson, had inherited mineral rights from my grandfather that turned out to be sitting on one of the largest natural gas deposits in eastern Pennsylvania. Patterson Sr. needed those rights to expand operations. Dad had agreed to partnership instead of outright sale, wanting to keep some control. Then came the police reports from 1984. Industrial accident at Patterson Timber. Daniel Thompson crushed by a lumber loader that mysteriously malfunctioned. The investigation was perfunctory, closed within a week with no real answers. But Ray had found the truth over decades of digging. Maintenance records showing the loader had been serviced the day before the accident. An insurance policy Patterson had taken out on my father just 2 months earlier for $500,000. A witness statement from a worker now deceased who'd seen Patterson and my father arguing heatedly about selling out completely just days before the accident. Ray had even found financial records showing Patterson had been hemorrhaging money and desperately needed those mineral rights to secure loans. But that wasn't the biggest shock waiting for me in that cabin. There was a folder marked JD in one of the filing cabinets. Inside were photographs that made my blood run cold. Jessica at 16 years old with Derek Patterson, who would have been 36 at the time. More photos over the years, always at a distance, always careful to avoid being obvious. Then, bank documents that knocked the wind out of me. An account in Jessica's maiden name, opened when she was 17 with regular monthly deposits from something called Patterson Holdings, LLC, a shell company. The deposits started at $500 a month and increased over time. They continued right through our dating, our marriage, the births of our children. Every single month for over 20 years, Jessica had been receiving payments. The recording equipment held dozens of audio files, all dated and carefully labeled. I clicked on one from 3 years ago. Ray's voice, elderly but clear, doing a timestamp. Then Jessica's voice, unmistakable, talking to Derek. She was complaining about playing housewife, asking how much longer she had to keep up the act. Derek's response made me sick. He said until they could provoke me into something they could use in court. They needed me discredited, not just divorced. Another recording from just last year had Jessica admitting she'd been married to me for 15 years, and sometimes forgot she was pretending to love me. Derek reminded her coldly that the kids were their insurance policy. I'd never fight back hard with them in the middle, and once I was completely broken, really destroyed, the mineral rights would revert to my next of kin. As my ex-wife with full custody, she'd control them until the kids turned 18, giving Derek access to everything. I sat in that cabin for hours, watching my entire life rearrange itself like a puzzle I'd been looking at upside down the whole time. Jessica hadn't fallen out of love with me. She'd never loved me at all. She'd been placed in my life deliberately when she was 17 years old. A teenager, groomed by a man more than twice her age. Our entire marriage was a con. My children were born as part of a long-term scheme to eventually steal my inheritance. The woman I'd trusted, built a life with, had children with, was an actress playing a role for money. The financial documents were staggering. The mineral rights my father had refused to sell were now worth approximately $6 million due to the natural gas boom. Ray had been quietly collecting lease payments on his portion for 40 years, living like he had nothing while secretly building a substantial fortune. Every cent was documented, every transaction legal and traceable. According to the will I found in the desk drawer, every penny was now mine. But Ray had been smarter than just hoarding money and evidence. He'd built a complete legal case that would destroy Patterson Timber entirely. There were documented environmental violations going back decades, tax evasion schemes involving offshore accounts, evidence of bribing local officials, including Judge Harrison, who'd presided over my divorce, proof that Derek had been covering up workplace safety violations that resulted in deaths. The evidence was overwhelming, meticulously gathered over 40 years, like a loaded tool waiting for someone to pull the trigger. The last file on the computer was a video message from Ray himself, recorded just weeks before he died. He looked skeletal, eaten away by cancer, but his eyes were sharp and clear. In the video, Ray apologized for not telling me sooner. He explained that the Pattersons had been watching him his entire adult life. If he'd approached me before now, they would have known and shut everything down. He needed me to lose everything first because then they'd think they'd won and stop watching. Now I could fight back safely. The money was mine, legal and clear, but what I did with the evidence was my choice. I could take the fortune and disappear, start a new life somewhere else. Or I could finish what my father started and bring them all down. Either way, the Pattersons would lose. I spent 5 days in that cabin, copying every single file onto multiple hard drives, memorizing documents, understanding the full scope of what the Patterson family had done. The choice Ray talked about wasn't really a choice at all. Running away with the money would mean my father's homicide went unpunished. It would mean my children growing up believing their dad was a failure who abandoned them. It would mean Jessica and Derek got away with destroying my life as part of a scheme that started before I was even born. The drive back to Pennsylvania felt completely different. I wasn't running from something anymore. I was driving toward justice with a truck full of evidence and a bank account that finally gave me the power to fight back. My first stop was the FBI field office in Philadelphia. I walked in and asked to speak to someone about a decades-long criminal conspiracy involving homicide, fraud, and corruption. The receptionist looked skeptical but made a call. Agent Maria Santos came down, a woman in her 40s with a no-nonsense expression that suggested she'd heard every crazy story imaginable. She brought me to an interview room and listened to my story with a stone face that gave away nothing. Then I started showing her the documents. Bank records, audio recordings, video evidence, witness statements, financial trails showing bribes and payoffs. Her expression changed completely. She stepped out and came back with 2 more agents, then her supervisor. Within an hour, I was sitting in a conference room with 6 federal agents and 2 prosecutors, walking them through 40 years of criminal activity. The investigation that followed took 5 months. Secret grand juries, forensic accountants tearing through decades of Patterson timber books, federal agents interviewing everyone who'd ever done business with Derek or his father. I stayed invisible during those months, living in a small apartment in downtown Philadelphia, following my lawyer's strict advice to remain completely out of sight while the machinery of justice ground forward. The FBI wanted me hidden in case the Pattersons tried something. They put me up in a safe location, and for 5 months I waited while agents built their case. The arrests happened on a Tuesday morning in September. Derek Patterson was taken from his country club in handcuffs. 3 city council members who'd been on the Patterson payroll, Judge Harrison, who'd destroyed me in divorce court, even the police chief who'd closed my father's accident investigation so quickly back in 1984. The charges ranged from tax evasion to conspiracy to commit fraud to environmental crimes that would cost millions in cleanup. My father's homicide couldn't be prosecuted because Patterson Sr. had died years ago, and they couldn't prove Derek knew about it at the time. But Derek would pay for continuing the cover-up and for everything else they'd done. Jessica's arrest happened differently. They picked her up from Lily's elementary school during afternoon pickup. She called me from jail a few hours later. It was the first time we'd spoken in 6 months. She was screaming, asking how I could do this to our children, saying they'd watched their mother arrested. I told her the truth. Their mother was never real. She was a character a teenage girl had been paid to play. The kids deserved to know who their father really was, not the failure she'd tried to paint me as. She broke down then, the perfect performance finally cracking. She admitted everything. She'd been promised millions when this was all over, to marry me, destroy me, steal my children's inheritance, to continue a con that started before I was even born. The woman I'd loved for over 20 years, who I'd believed had loved me back, confessed she'd been receiving payments since she was 17 years old, to get close to me in high school, to marry me right after graduation, to have my children, all choreographed so the Pattersons could eventually control the mineral rights my father had died protecting. The trial made national news. Headlines read, "Timber Dynasty Falls in Decades-Long Homicide Conspiracy." Derek got 15 years federal time. Jessica got 5 years, but would likely serve 2 with good behavior. The other conspirators fell like dominoes, each racing to make deals and testify against the others. My cousin Dennis, who Ray had warned me about, got 3 years for his role in helping them track Ray's activities. But the real victory came when I got my kids back. Ethan and Lily had been living with Jessica's mother during the months of investigation and trial. The first time I saw them after everything came out, after the truth was public knowledge, Ethan wouldn't meet my eyes. He was almost 15 by then, taller than me, angry and confused. Lily was 11 and ran straight to me crying, asking if Mommy was really a bad person. I took them to our new house, a modest 3-bedroom place not far from their school. We sat in the living room and I told them the truth as gently as I could. Their mother made terrible choices, but that doesn't mean she doesn't love them. People are complicated. They can do bad things and still have good inside them. It took time. Months of therapy for all 3 of us, individual and family sessions. Slowly, Ethan's anger melted into understanding. He started asking questions about his grandfather he'd never met, about what really happened, about the man I really was beyond the version Jessica had presented. Lily's confusion gradually settled into acceptance. We found our rhythm as a different kind of family, one built on complete honesty instead of comfortable lies. I never badmouthed Jessica to them despite everything. She was still their mother, but they knew the truth now. I used Ray's money to start Thompson Timber Company, hired Pete and all the good workers from Patterson Industries who'd been laid off when the company collapsed during the investigation, gave them better wages, profit sharing, actual respect, and safety standards. The business grew faster than I expected. Turns out when you treat people right and run things honestly, success follows. The storage unit where I'd lived is still mine. I pay the $90 every month and sometimes go there just to sit and remember. Frank, the security guard who'd pretended not to notice me living there, now works as my head of security. He told me once that remembering where you came from keeps you from losing sight of where you're going. Uncle Ray was right about absolutely everything. Sometimes you need to lose everything to finally see the truth that was hidden underneath. My father died, refusing to surrender what was rightfully his, and it took 40 years for justice to come calling. Ray lived as a hermit in the wilderness, gathering evidence and wealth in secret, sacrificing any normal life to ensure the truth would eventually surface. And me, I went from eating cold soup in a storage unit to owning a $6 million inheritance and running a successful company. But the real wealth isn't in the bank account. It's in Ethan's laugh when I help him with calculus homework he insists he doesn't need help with. It's in Lily's excitement when she shows me her science project about sustainable forestry. It's in knowing my father would be proud, that Ray's sacrifice meant something, that sometimes the worst thing that can happen to you is actually a gift wrapped in barbed wire and pain. Jessica said I'd die poor and alone. She was spectacularly wrong on both counts. But more importantly, she taught me that living a comfortable life surrounded by people is the deepest form of loneliness. Truth, even when it destroys everything you thought you knew, is real freedom. And that freedom is worth more than all the mineral rights in Pennsylvania.